Welcome to Write to Publish, your go-to podcast for all things writing and publishing. I'm Karen Stanley, a 14 times published author and the founder of Mabel and Stanley Publishing. Join me as I share a multitude of tips and insights drawn from my own writing and publishing journey. We'll be hearing from some inspirational authors too, who will share their writing experiences and top tips for success. Each week, we'll learn about an aspect of writing, from composition to genre and from publishing to marketing. Listen in as we learn and chat about all things writing and publishing, and let's get you on the right path. Hello, and welcome to another episode of Write to Publish with me, Karen Stanley. Lovely to have you joining me here. Whether it be evening, morning, afternoon, tea time, it's great to have you here, whether you're listening on Thursday when the podcast is launched or whether you're luxuriating somewhere after a busy day and listening to my dulcet tones. It's great to have you with me. So this week, I want to talk to you about editing. Now, there are, again, lots of the dreaded experts out there who will tell you that you don't need an editor because you can easily edit your work yourself. Now, let me tell you, I am an editor. I edit for a living and I still have editors look at my work. I still have proofreaders look at my work. I still have beta readers look at my work. I cannot edit my own work sufficiently for publication. And you might think, well, you're not much of an editor then. But the unfortunate thing is when you've written something, you don't really edit what's on the page. You edit what you thought you wrote or what you think you've written or what you had it in your mind. And sometimes you're too close to the manuscript to be objective because you know the manuscript inside out. You've written it, for goodness sake. It's very difficult to be objective about the edits, which is why you will always need a second pair of eyes of some kind. So let's talk about when you need that professional help and how much professional help you might need. Because let's face it, editing is expensive. I've had lots of people say to me, oh my goodness me, it costs so much money. And, why is it so expensive? I'll tell you why it's expensive. It's expensive because it blooming well takes hours. It takes hours and hours and hours. And even once you've finished editing, I'm publishing a book for a wonderful gentleman at the moment, Steve Salis. I'm publishing his book currently. And I've edited his book. He's been through his book at least 15 times, and we still found the odd little blip on the horizon, the odd little typo, or something that we just didn't quite like as much as we thought we did, or we wanted to change. So it doesn't matter how many times you go through it, there'll always be something that you think, that you've overlooked, or something that you didn't quite see there. So it doesn't matter how good you are at editing, you are always going to need a second pair of eyes, regardless of your experience, regardless of how good you are at that. I can't imagine anyone being able to edit it and not need some kind of second pair of eyes at all. So once you've written your manuscript, it's all finished, you're really happy with the content, you've played around with the composition, you've played around with the chapter kind of structure, you're really happy with the way it flows, you don't really feel like you need major changes, because if you needed major changes to plot or to flow, if you're writing a non-fiction book, chapter flow, for example, then you might need a developmental edit. And that would be someone, I've talked about this before, who takes kind of a bird's eye view of your manuscript. They have an overview of everything that you've written. So they won't get down to the nitty-gritty of the punctuation, the full stops, the capital letters, the commas, etc., etc. They will literally just be giving you an overview of what it looks like so far and whether there's any gaps. Okay, so assuming that you're really quite happy with the structure of your work, you're really quite happy that there aren't any plot holes and any omissions, because that's really quite far up in the editing food chain, if you like. That's the very first look that you have at the manuscript to try and decide what's missing, what needs putting in, why the flow doesn't work, why you've got a big gaping hole there, why you've got an omission, why you've got yourself repeated. So you might need that bird's eye view, you might need that developmental edit. But let's assume that you don't need that and you've been able to adequately plan and get your manuscript together in a format that you think is good and sound, okay? So you're going to need a professional edit at some point somewhere down the line, but there are a few steps that you can take in order to sort of cut costs really and give your editor less time that they need to spend on it. So before we go down that road, you're going to write the manuscript, you're going to get it done, you're going to be happy with it developmentally. And the first thing you do is you're going to give it a first initial read through. And this is the point where you're going to pick up any glaring errors like, oh my goodness me, I've got, the word the missing at the beginning of my sentence, or I've, used a word twice, or I really should have put a comma in there because when I've read it out loud, that sentence is so long, I felt like I was gasping for breath. One piece of advice I would give you is that if you can possibly read your manuscript aloud, maybe not if you're on the train or you want to risk sounding like a lunatic, but if you can possibly read your manuscript aloud, that is when the errors will jump out at you. That's when you'll hear if the sentences are too long, for example. That's when you hear if you repeated yourself. That's when you hear if you've used a word that doesn't quite make sense. Or that's when you'll hear that really you probably could do with a full stop in there. Or, oh, goodness me, you've forgotten to put speech marks around your dialogue. But you'll hear that when you read it aloud. So if in doubt, read it aloud. So the first thing you could do is you're going to go back over your manuscript. You're going to give it a good read through and amend everything that you can in that first instance. Now, there are AI type programs, whatever you want to call them, things like Grammarly, Pro Writing Aid. They are programs that you can use to give your manuscript a bit of an edit. They're all right. In my opinion, they're okay. I really think that when you put them through one of these programs, really all you get, excuse me, still is a first draft. Because I did this with a client of mine. She's actually dyslexic. She's done an amazing job of writing a book, considering that she sometimes finds that challenging. She's actually dictated her book because she wasn't able to write it all the way through. And she's then taken her manuscript and put it through, I think she put it through Pro Writing Aid. And whilst it's all right, you've still got to go back through that whole manuscript and respond to any comments or amendments that AI program has made, exactly like you would with a human editor. Now, if you're somebody who's a little bit dyslexic or struggles with that, going back through all of those errors and amendments and mistakes can be just as hard, really, as looking for them yourself in the first place. She found it really bamboozling, quite confusing, quite labour intensive, and she really found it hard. One of the other things that I think is a bit of a problem with these programs is they will not get colloquialisms, like slang or local language. Sometimes they will suggest that you put punctuation in that, although technically it might be correct, it might change the whole kind of flow of that sentence and not really make it mean the same thing when you read it aloud. Okay, it might not recognize names of places or people, for example. Sometimes it won't flag up a mistake when actually you've used the word if and you should have used the word of. So it will miss lots of stuff and it will miss things because it's a computer, let's face it, it's a robot and you're a human. So if you are really lacking in confidence with regard to your literary skills, then yes, ProAid, Grammarly, you could pop it through that to start with. And I certainly think for sort of shorter text, like blogs and social media posts and things like that, it's probably great. But for a whole book, for me, the jury's out. I think it's a good kind of stepping stone, and it will give you a bit of an idea of what you've got to work with, and it will clean the manuscript up somewhat. But I genuinely don't believe that your manuscript is going to be ready for publication just by putting it through an AI program, simply because, as I've said before, it's a robot. It's going to miss things. It's going to misconstrue things. It's going to want to put things in a certain way that might not reflect your voice, your audience, or your subject matter, particularly if you've got any jargon or I don't know if you've got like a 3-step program for one of your strategies and you've given it a bit of an acronym or you've given it a bit of a catchy title. It's not going to understand those little nuances of language. So it's okay as a stepping stone, but it's not okay as the final draft. That's my opinion. Okay, so you might have read it through, cleared up all your glaring mistakes. You might have put it through an AI program. If you have, you're going to have to respond to all the amendments and suggestions that AI program has made. Then you're probably going to have to give it just a cursory glance through. Another way to check for mistakes, particularly if you're working in Microsoft Word, is once you've done the bare bones of the editing, have a look through and literally just skim back through the document and look for all the blue and the red lines. The blue lines, if you hover over them under words or phrases, they will give you suggestions, usually for punctuation, or tell you that you've missed out a comma, or you've omitted a word, or perhaps you might have used it's suggesting a different word choice, or perhaps you've used a word twice, for example. So have another skim through, check all the blue and red lines. Red lines are normally for spelling mistakes, blue lines are normally for grammar. Check all of those. That's a really good sort of quick way to clean it up once again. And then once you've done that and you're quite happy with it, the best thing you can do, if at all possible, is to get yourself a beta reader. I have a beta reader for my fiction novels, particularly, a very good friend of mine, somebody who enjoys my genre. So don't give someone your medical journal to read if they've got no medical knowledge and they're really squeamish and don't want to read about operations. They're not going to be the best person to give you feedback on that text. So get someone to read your manuscript who's got an interest in the subject matter or some knowledge, or is able to give you constructive criticism, is able to give you constructive feedback. You don't want someone who's just going to go, yeah, it's great, it's absolutely fine, it doesn't need anything doing to it at all, unless, of course, maybe that is the case, although it's unlikely. But you do want someone who is at least interested in the genre that you've written and has at least some kind of either expertise or the wherewithal to be able to give you proper feedback. Otherwise, you're sort of wasting your time a little bit, and it could be quite a frustrating process. So one of my very good friends, she loves my genre, my chick lit genre that I write. She is very anxious to read a new book when I write it and bring it out, and she will always read it for me before it goes through to final edit. And she'll put little post-it notes. I print it out for her. She'll put little post-it notes in the manuscript and say, oh, did you know you've got the same person standing behind one person when you've said they're standing somewhere else? She's very good. So someone that you trust, someone who's got good English language knowledge, and someone who's interested in your genre, who will beta read your novel and give you some good constructive feedback. And perhaps, again, don't forget, this is probably second or third time that it's gone through the editing process, will mop up any bits that you haven't found. Just a little kind of by the by, if you get your text 80% correct with only 20% of errors, you've done well. That's considered a really good benchmark. So don't beat yourself up if once your book is published, you read it and on page 412 you've missed a comma. It's quite normal. And in fact, if you've only got 20% of tiny errors, I'm not talking big glaring errors, nobody wants to read a book that's flawed in that way, but if you've got the odd little mistake, your reader will forgive you. It's nigh on impossible to publish a book without one single mistake. And in fact, I challenge you to find a book that hasn't got one single mistake. It's just the nature of the beast. So now you've had a read through. You've put it through Grammarly or Pro Writing Aid or something similar if you want to. You've given it another skim through. You've gone through it, checked for the red and blue lines just to mop up any sort of glaring errors before you start. Then you send it to your beta reader, who will read it at their leisure and give you some constructive feedback. Hopefully, this is why it needs to be a trusted source of yours. And then, once you've done all of that, then I would recommend that you call in the professionals, as it were, and it might be at that stage that you'll get away with a proofread. Hopefully, if if you're secure enough to know about developmental editing, if you're secure enough in understanding about story arcs and plot lines, and you're secure enough to understand how your genre of non-fiction book should work, then you've kind of bypassed that stage. Then you've done your cursory checks, you've put it through your Pro Writing Aid, you've put it through your blue and red lines stage, then it's gone to your beta reader. And if all of those things you feel quite happy and your beta reader hasn't come back to you and gone, goodness me, I found this really hard to read, it doesn't flow, it sticks and starts, then you're going to have to go back to the drawing board, and it might be that you have to accept that, I absolutely cannot dodge that process. But if you've got to this point and you're still quite happy with it and you're getting good feedback, then you might get away with a proofread, which you're going to have to pay for. I can't really tell you the cost of that because it will very much vary on the length of your manuscript, on the proofreader that you use and the amount of experience they've got, the feedback that you get from a professional who says, yep, okay, I can just read this for you, or I think it needs this, or I think it needs that. But do your due diligence when you're looking for editors and proofreaders. Some of them will be amazing, some of them will not. So just like anything, you do need to do your due diligence. You need to do your research and make sure you get someone who comes highly recommended with a little bit of kudos. So you've done all of these stages. You've decided that you are going to put it through for a proofread and you feel like it's clean enough to go through that final stage. Then you'll get your proofreader. They will proofread it for you, send it back with any amends and edits. And then I would recommend, if you can bear it, if you're not sick to the back teeth of it by now, then I would recommend that you give it a final read through, and I guarantee you that you will find at least one or two tiny mistakes. If you don't, I would question your honesty, or perhaps I would argue that you haven't read it carefully enough. But joking aside, hopefully at that point your manuscript's going to be pretty clean. As I say, you might find the odd little blip along the way, but it's going to be near as damn it done and ready to publish. And then once you've done all of that and you're happy with it, then you'll be sending it to your publisher for formatting and uploading, depending on what publishing route you're taking. So I would say if you're expecting to write a manuscript and have no professional help whatsoever with regards to editing, I would ask yourself very carefully whether you think that's a good idea. I have been writing for a long time now. I've written 14 books and I still, and I've edited, goodness me, I don't even know how many books, and I still have professional eyes give my book once over. And in fact, I read it through and edit it myself twice. I have it beta read, I have it proofread, and then I read it again. So that just gives you a little benchmark of how much work needs to be done on a manuscript before it's ready for publishing. And I would say if you don't do all of those things and you put out a poorly edited manuscript, then nothing will ruin your author reputation quicker than something that looks a bit lazy or doesn't look professional. You don't want to put your name on something that you don't value or that you aren't proud of. So that's my advice for this week: when to call in the professionals for the editing, and the fact that at some point you're going to need a professional set of eyes to look over your manuscript if it's going to be something that you're proud of. If you have any questions, or you'd like questions with regard to editing, or you want some help with editing, please do get in touch. You can find me on all the socials at Mabel and Stanley Publishing, or you can email me mabelandstanley@outlook.com. Please do ask questions. I'm always happy to answer. Whether we work together or not, I'm always happy to help you along your way. So I wish you luck, and please, please, please remember, editing is a long, slow, arduous process. It is not a one and done type situation. So do not be disheartened if your manuscript goes back and forwards more times than a fiddler's elbow. As my good old Nan used to say, it's part of the process. You need to be prepared to be in it for the long haul. You need to be prepared to amend, revise, respond to amendments, amend, revise. That's just the nature of the beast. So don't be disheartened if you think, goodness me, this is a long, slow, arduous process. Yes, it is. And that's just the way it goes. But if it feels like that, you're probably doing it right, I would say. So good luck. Do get in touch if you've got any questions. Happy editing, and make sure you don't skip this stage. Please, please, please do not put out a book that you don't think is amazing. I wish you well. Have a wonderful week and good luck, and let's get you on that right path. See you again soon.